Sarah came home that evening exhausted from another long day at work. The house was eerily quiet, which felt strange because her husband, Mark, usually had the TV blaring by this time. She dropped her bag on the couch and called out his name, but there was no answer. That's when she noticed the envelope on the kitchen counter. Her name was scrawled across it in Mark's messy handwriting. Her heart skipped a beat as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just one line: "Starting a new life without you." For a moment she stood frozen, staring at the note as if it might suddenly make sense. Then panic set in. She rushed to their bedroom, flinging open drawers and closet doors. His clothes were gone, his suitcase was missing. She ran to the study where they kept their important documents. The safe was open and empty. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her laptop and logged into their joint bank account. The balance was zero. Every penny they had saved over the years, gone. Sarah collapsed onto the floor, clutching the note in her hand. Her mind raced. How could he do this? They had their problems, sure, but she never thought he'd just leave without a word. And take everything? She felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and sheer disbelief. But as she sat there, tears streaming down her face, something inside her shifted. She wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. Mark wasn't going to get away with this. She would find him, and she would make him pay. The next few days were a blur. Sarah called in sick to work and spent every waking moment piecing together what had happened. She went through Mark's phone records, his emails, his social media, anything she could find. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. Mark had been planning this for months. He had been transferring small amounts of money to a separate account, slowly building up a nest egg. He had also been in contact with a woman named Lisa, someone Sarah had never heard of. The emails between them were full of promises of a new life together, far away from Sarah. Sarah's best friend Emily came over one evening with a bottle of wine and a listening ear. "I can't believe he did this to you," Emily said, shaking her head. "But you're stronger than you think, Sarah. You'll get through this." Sarah nodded, but inside she was already plotting her next move. She wasn't just going to get through this, she was going to come out on top. With Emily's help, Sarah hired a private investigator. It didn't take long for the investigator to track Mark down. He was living in a small town a few hours away with Lisa. Sarah felt a surge of anger when she saw the photos of them together, smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. But she pushed the anger aside. She had a plan. Sarah's next step was to confront Mark. She drove to the town where he was living and waited outside his new apartment. When he finally appeared, she stepped out of her car and walked straight up to him. The look on his face was priceless: shock, guilt, and a little bit of fear. "Sarah," he stammered, "what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question," she replied, her voice steady. "You left me with nothing, Mark. You took everything we had and just walked away. Did you really think I wouldn't come after you?" Mark tried to explain, to justify what he had done, but Sarah wasn't interested in his excuses. She had already recorded their conversation, capturing every word of his admission. She knew this would be crucial evidence in the legal battle that was coming. Back home, Sarah met with her lawyer. She laid out everything she had: the bank records, the emails, the photos, the recording. Her lawyer assured her that they had a strong case. Mark had not only stolen their savings, but had also taken out loans in Sarah's name, leaving her with a mountain of debt. It was going to be a tough fight, but Sarah was ready. The legal battle dragged on for months. Mark tried to play the victim, claiming that Sarah had driven him away with her coldness and neglect. But the evidence was overwhelming. In the end, the court ruled in Sarah's favor. Mark was ordered to repay the stolen money and clear the fraudulent debts. He was also hit with hefty fines for his actions. As Sarah stood outside the courthouse that day, she felt a sense of relief she hadn't felt in months. It was over. She had won. But more than that, she had proven to herself that she was stronger than she ever thought possible. She sold the house she had shared with Mark and moved to a new city, ready to start fresh. One evening, as she was unpacking boxes in her new apartment, she found the note Mark had left her. She stared at it for a moment, then tore it into tiny pieces and threw it in the trash. She didn't need it anymore. She had built a new life for herself, one that was entirely her own. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly free. Sarah's new life began slowly but surely. She found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far from the memories of her old life. The walls were bare and the rooms felt empty, but she saw it as a blank canvas. She started decorating little by little, choosing colors and furniture that reflected her personality, not Mark's. It was liberating, making decisions just for herself. She even adopted a cat, a scruffy little tabby she named Leo, who quickly became her constant companion. Work became her sanctuary. Sarah threw herself into her job, taking on extra projects and volunteering for tasks no one else wanted. Her boss noticed her dedication and offered her a promotion, which came with a significant raise. For the first time in years, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment that wasn't tied to anyone else. She was building something for herself, and it felt good. But even as she moved forward, the past had a way of creeping back in. One evening, as she was scrolling through social media, she stumbled upon a post from Lisa. It was a photo of her and Mark, smiling on a beach somewhere tropical. The caption read, "Living our best life." Sarah's stomach churned. How could they be so happy after what they'd done? She closed the app and tried to shake off the anger, but it lingered. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd ever truly be free of them. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a renewed sense of determination. She wasn't going to let Mark and Lisa's happiness, or the illusion of it, ruin her peace. She decided to focus on herself, not them. She signed up for a yoga class, something she'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. She also started journaling, pouring her thoughts and feelings onto paper. It was therapeutic, and it helped her process everything she'd been through. One day, while cleaning out an old box of paperwork, Sarah found something that made her blood run cold. It was a life insurance policy she and Mark had taken out years ago. She had completely forgotten about it. The policy was still active, and Mark was listed as the beneficiary. Sarah's mind raced. If something happened to her, Mark would get everything. The thought made her sick. She immediately called her lawyer, who advised her to change the beneficiary as soon as possible. As she filled out the paperwork to update the policy, Sarah couldn't help but think about how much control Mark had once had over her life. He had taken so much from her, their savings, their home, even her sense of security. But he wasn't going to take anything else. She made herself the sole beneficiary, feeling a small but significant victory. Weeks turned into months, and Sarah's life continued to improve. She made new friends at yoga and even went on a few dates, though she wasn't ready for anything serious. She was content with her life, and for the first time in a long time, she felt happy. But just as she was starting to feel like she'd truly moved on, the past came knocking again. One evening, as she was cooking dinner, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" she said cautiously. "Sarah, it's me," came Mark's voice on the other end. She froze, the spatula slipping from her hand and clattering to the floor. "I know I have no right to call you, but I need your help." Sarah's heart pounded. "What do you want, Mark?" she asked, her voice cold. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "Lisa left me. She took everything. The money, the car, even the dog. I have nothing left, Sarah. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I was wrong. I need a second chance." Sarah stood there, stunned. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After everything he'd done, after all the pain he'd caused, he had the nerve to ask for her help. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. "Mark," she said finally, her voice steady, "you made your choice. Now live with it." She hung up the phone and blocked his number. As she stood there in her kitchen, surrounded by the life she had built for herself, she felt a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. Mark's call was a reminder of how far she'd come and how much stronger she was now. She wasn't the same woman he had left behind. She was better. Sarah finished cooking dinner and sat down to eat, Leo purring contentedly at her feet. She glanced around her apartment, at the life she had created on her own terms, and smiled. She had faced betrayal, fought back, and come out stronger on the other side. And as she took a bite of her meal, she knew one thing for certain: her best life was still ahead of her. Sarah's days settled into a new rhythm, one that felt calm and steady. She had built a life that was entirely her own, free from the shadows of her past. But just when she thought she had closed the chapter on Mark for good, something unexpected happened. "What's going on?" Sarah asked as soon as Emily picked up. "I was at the mall and there she was," Emily said, her voice tinged with excitement. She looked different. Not the happy, carefree Lisa from those photos Mark sent you. She looked tired, almost defeated. I couldn't resist. I went up to her. Sarah's heart raced. What did she say? Emily hesitated for a moment. She told me she left Mark because he was controlling and manipulative. She said he drained her financially and emotionally just like he did to you. She's struggling now, trying to rebuild her life. She even asked about you. Sarah was silent, processing the information. She had always seen Lisa as the villain in her story, the woman who had stolen her husband and her life. But now, hearing that Lisa had also been a victim of Mark's behavior, she felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, pity, and even a little guilt. "What did you tell her?" Sarah asked finally. "I told her you were doing great," Emily said, "and I gave her your number. I hope that's okay." Sarah sighed. "I don't know, Emily. I'm not sure I'm ready to talk to her." "I get it," Emily said gently. "But maybe hearing her side of the story will help you find some closure. Or maybe it'll just confirm what you already know, that Mark was the problem, not you or Lisa." Later that day, Sarah received a text from an unknown number. It was Lisa. "Hi, Sarah, this is Lisa. Emily gave me your number. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'd really like to talk. No pressure, just if you're willing." Sarah stared at the message for a long time, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to ignore it and move on, but another part was curious. What could Lisa possibly have to say? After a few minutes, she typed a reply. "Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street tomorrow at 10. We'll talk." The next morning, Sarah arrived at the coffee shop early, her nerves on edge. She ordered a latte and found a quiet table in the corner. A few minutes later, Lisa walked in. She looked just as Emily had described: tired, worn out, and nothing like the confident woman in the photos Sarah had seen. Lisa spotted Sarah and walked over, her hands trembling slightly. "Thanks for meeting me," Lisa said as she sat down. "I know this is awkward." Sarah nodded, unsure of what to say. "Why did you want to talk?" she asked finally. Lisa took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize," she said. "I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. But I also wanted you to know that Mark, he's not who he pretends to be. He lied to me just like he lied to you. He told me you were cold and distant, that you didn't care about him. He made me believe he was the victim. But once we were together, I saw the real him. He was controlling, manipulative, and selfish. He took everything from me, just like he took everything from you." Sarah listened in silence, her emotions swirling. She had spent so much time blaming Lisa, but now she realized that Lisa had been just as much a victim as she was. It was a hard truth to accept, but it also brought a strange sense of relief. "I'm sorry," Lisa said again, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't know what I was getting into. If I had known the truth, I never would have gotten involved with him." Sarah took a deep breath, her own eyes filling with tears. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "I needed to hear that." The two women sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared experience hanging in the air. Finally, Sarah reached across the table and took Lisa's hand. "We both deserve better," she said softly. "And we'll get there." As Sarah left the coffee shop that day, she felt a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. She had faced her past, confronted the people who had hurt her, and come out stronger on the other side. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was ready to face it, head on and unafraid. And as she walked home, the autumn sun warming her face, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Her best life was still ahead of her, and she was ready to live it. Sarah's life continued to move forward, but the meeting with Lisa had left a lasting impact. It was as if a heavy fog had lifted, allowing her to see things more clearly. She realized that holding on to anger and resentment had only weighed her down, and letting go felt like a breath of fresh air. She started to focus even more on her own growth, taking up new hobbies and reconnecting with old friends. She even joined a book club, something she had always wanted to do but never made time for. One evening, as she was getting ready for bed, her phone buzzed with a message from Mark. It was unusual for him to reach out these days, as their communication had become minimal. The message read, "Sarah, I know I've said this before, but I'm truly sorry for everything. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize now how much I hurt you." One afternoon, as she was leaving work, she noticed a familiar figure standing near her car. It was Mark. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, she considered turning around and walking away. But something made her stop. She squared her shoulders and walked toward him, her expression unreadable. "What are you doing here, Mark?" she asked, her voice firm but calm. He looked different, thinner, older, and worn out. His once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. "I know I shouldn't be here," he began, his voice shaky. "But I didn't know where else to go. Lisa left me with nothing, Sarah. I lost my job and I'm about to lose my apartment. I need help." Sarah crossed her arms, studying him carefully. She felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly overshadowed by anger. "You left me with nothing, Mark," she reminded him. "You took everything we had and walked away without a second thought. And now you expect me to help you?" Mark looked down, his face red with shame. "I know I don't deserve your help," he said quietly. "But I'm desperate. I have nowhere else to turn." Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to walk away and leave him to deal with the mess he'd created. But another part of her, the part that had once loved him, felt a pang of sympathy. She knew what it was like to feel lost and alone. Still, she wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. "I'll help you," she said finally, "but on one condition." Mark's head snapped up, his eyes wide with hope. "Anything," he said quickly. "You need to take responsibility for what you did," Sarah said firmly. "You need to apologize, not just to me but to everyone you hurt. And you need to prove that you're serious about changing. If you can do that, I'll help you get back on your feet. But if you betray my trust again, Mark, I won't give you another chance." Mark nodded eagerly, tears welling up in his eyes. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice cracking. "I promise, I'll do whatever it takes." Over the next few weeks, Sarah kept her word. She helped Mark find a small apartment and even lent him some money to get by. But she made it clear that this was a loan, not a gift, and she expected him to pay her back. She also connected him with a job counselor and encouraged him to seek therapy. It wasn't easy for her to be around him, but she saw glimpses of the man she had once loved, the man who had been buried under years of selfishness and poor choices. As Mark began to rebuild his life, Sarah found herself reflecting on her own journey. Helping him had been harder than she expected, but it had also been healing in a way. It reminded her of how far she had come and how much she had grown. She realized that forgiving Mark, not for his sake but for her own, had lifted a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying. One evening, as she sat on her couch with Leo curled up beside her, Sarah received a text from Mark. It was a photo of his new apartment, clean and organized, with a note that read, "Thank you for giving me a second chance. I won't let you down." Sarah smiled as she read it. She didn't know what the future held for Mark, but she knew one thing for sure. She had done the right thing. As she put her phone down and leaned back against the cushions, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She had faced betrayal, fought back, and come out stronger on the other side. And now, by helping Mark, she had taken back control of her story in a way she never expected. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. And as she closed her eyes, listening to Leo's soft purring, she knew that her best life was still ahead of her. Months passed and Sarah continued to focus on her own life. She had built a routine that brought her joy: yoga classes in the mornings, work during the day, and quiet evenings at home with Leo. She even started taking weekend trips to nearby towns, exploring new places and meeting new people. It felt like she was finally living for herself, and it was liberating. Mark, on the other hand, seemed to be making progress. He had found a steady job and was slowly paying Sarah back the money she had lent him. He sent her occasional updates, always thanking her for her help and apologizing again for what he had done. Sarah appreciated the effort, but she kept her distance. She had forgiven him, but she wasn't ready to let him back into her life in any meaningful way. She had learned the hard way that some bridges, once burned, could never be fully rebuilt. One Saturday morning, Sarah was sipping coffee on her balcony, enjoying the crisp autumn air, when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. "You'll never believe who I just ran into," it read, followed by a photo of Lisa. Sarah's stomach dropped. She hadn't thought about Lisa in months, and seeing her face brought back a flood of emotions. She quickly called Emily. "I just wanted you to know that I'm working on becoming a better person. Thank you for giving me a second chance." Sarah read the message twice, her emotions swirling. She had forgiven Mark, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to fully trust him again. Still, she appreciated the effort he was making. She typed a simple reply. "Thank you for saying that. I hope you continue to grow and learn from your mistakes." As she put her phone down, Sarah felt a sense of peace. She had come a long way from the woman who had stood in her empty kitchen, clutching that note from Mark. She had faced betrayal, fought back, and come out stronger on the other side. And now, she was finally starting to feel like herself again. A few weeks later, Sarah received an invitation to a charity gala hosted by her company. It was a big event, and she was excited to attend. She bought a new dress, something bold and colorful that reflected her newfound confidence. As she walked into the gala that evening, she felt a sense of pride. She had worked hard to get to where she was, and she was ready to celebrate her success. The evening was going perfectly until she spotted a familiar face across the room. It was Mark. He was standing near the bar, dressed in a suit that looked a little too big for him. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What was he doing here? She considered turning around and leaving, but something made her stay. She squared her shoulders and walked over to him. "Mark," she said, her voice steady. "What are you doing here?" Mark turned, his eyes widening in surprise. "Sarah?" he said, his voice tinged with nervousness. "I didn't expect to see you here. I got a job with one of the event sponsors. I'm just here to help set up." Sarah nodded, studying him carefully. He looked different, more humble, less arrogant. "I'm glad you're doing well," she said finally. Mark smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Thanks to you," he said. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for your help. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful." Sarah felt a flicker of warmth in her chest. She had spent so much time being angry at Mark, but now seeing him trying to change, she felt a sense of hope. Maybe people really could change. Maybe second chances were worth giving. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter, dancing, and conversation. Sarah felt lighter than she had in years, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. As she left the gala that night, she felt a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. She had faced her past, confronted the people who had hurt her, and come out stronger on the other side. As she walked home, the city lights twinkling around her, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was ready to face it, head-on and unafraid. Her best life was still ahead of her, and she was ready to live it. Sarah's life had settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and fulfilling. She had built a life she was proud of, one that was entirely her own. Her days were filled with work, hobbies, and the occasional weekend adventure. She had even started dating again, though she was taking it slow. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly happy. One sunny Saturday morning, Sarah decided to take Leo for a walk in the park. It was one of her favorite ways to unwind, and she loved watching Leo explore the world with his curious little eyes. As they strolled along the path, Sarah spotted a familiar figure sitting on a bench. It was Mark. He was alone, staring out at the pond, his expression thoughtful. Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether to approach him. But something about the way he looked, so different from the man she had once known, made her curious. She walked over, Leo trotting happily beside her. "Hey," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. Mark looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. "Sarah?" he said, his voice warm but cautious. "It's good to see you." Sarah sat down on the bench beside him, letting Leo sniff around at their feet. "How have you been?" she asked. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been better," he admitted. "But I'm trying. I've been going to therapy, working on myself. It's not easy, but I'm making progress." Sarah nodded, feeling a flicker of pride. "That's good to hear," she said. "It takes a lot of courage to face your mistakes and try to change." Mark smiled, a small, genuine smile. "Thanks to you," he said. "If you hadn't given me that second chance, I don't know where I'd be right now, probably still stuck in the same cycle of selfishness and regret." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so much time being angry at Mark, but now seeing him trying to change, she felt a sense of hope. Maybe people really could change. Maybe second chances were worth giving. They sat in silence for a while, watching the ducks paddle across the pond. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt strangely comforting. Finally, Mark spoke again. "I know I don't deserve it," he said, his voice quiet. "But I just wanted to say thank you for everything. You didn't have to help me, but you did, and I'll never forget that." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had come so far from the woman who had stood in her empty kitchen, clutching that note from Mark. She had faced betrayal, fought back, and come out stronger on the other side. And now, sitting here with him, she felt a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. "You're welcome," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "I'm glad you're doing better." As they sat there, the sun warming their faces, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was ready to face it head on and unafraid. Her best life was still ahead of her, and she was ready to live it. When it was time to go, Sarah stood up and gave Mark a small smile. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," Mark replied, his eyes filled with gratitude. As Sarah walked away, Leo trotting happily beside her, she felt a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in years. She had faced her past, confronted the people who had hurt her, and come out stronger on the other side. And now, as she looked ahead to the future, she knew that her best life was still ahead of her. She was ready to live it, unburdened by the weight of the past, and filled with hope for what was to come.